Welcome back. I'm Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now, and today we're talking about what are the next steps in your recovery. As always, welcome your questions, your comments. Would love to hear what's going on with you today. How are things progressing in your recovery? If you haven't already, head over to Sober Now's Facebook page, give it a quick like. You'll get notifications about future live streams and other content that we're creating. All right, let's just jump right into it. Looking at the next steps, asking yourself, what am I working on? What are my goals? What are your dreams? And do you have the courage to have those? What are your priorities right now, and how do we choose those? The starting point that I always offer folks is follow Maslow's hierarchy. It starts with things that we need for survival, and it focuses on basic life need fulfillment. And this is vital to recovery. So really crucial, important things, having housing, having food security, having all of your basic life needs met, absolutely the focus for recovery, and choosing and gaining some stability in your pathway to recovery, whatever that is, whether it's harm reduction or MAT, whether it's abstinence, getting that stability and just focusing on developing supports, practicing whether it's a program that you're in or services, treatment that you're taking advantage of. Get some stability, get some clean time, get focused on the really important stuff. And then as we go along, it's exciting to see what becomes possible. My friends in Narcotics Anonymous have an expression that through the course of recovery, new possibilities arise and lost dreams awaken. I've always loved that. I've always loved the promises of AA and the things that become possible in life as we go. So just getting healthy is the starting point. Sometimes just being clean today is the best that we can do, and that's true for a lot of us even in long-term recovery. Some days the best you can do is just not drink today. We know to safeguard against complacency, but that gets tricky sometimes. As you achieve some goals, you absolutely should celebrate them, but then sometimes we just get comfortable. We hit plateaus and we stay there. And the best way to ensure long-term recovery and ongoing growth is to keep setting the next goal. If you can't describe what you're working towards currently, then chances are you're maintaining. And I don't want to judge that, but I do want to encourage you to consider what's next. Let's look at how you make that decision, because at some point we're making this transition from surviving into living. We see improvements in our life and we get scared. Rarely do I get to hear folks talk about how scary it is to get better, but I think for a lot of us, it feels like the more we attain and achieve, it just feels like we have that much more to lose. Our past, for most of us, conditioned us to believe that if we have something good or if we become something good, it's only a matter of time till that gets taken away from us. Our childhoods, trauma, places that active substance use disorder took us, all of those taught us that sooner or later, everything's going to go to hell, and we should be prepared for that. There's a rock band Stain that I often quote from the song It's Been a While. The lyric is, it's been a while since I've gone and fucked things up just like I always do. And what I share with folks is that a big part of success occurs when we stop predicting failure, when we stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm fond of saying that for people like us, when we get tired of waiting for the shoe to drop, we start throwing shoes. We nudge our lives towards self-destruction because we're anxious, because we're afraid. And we develop this mentality of, well, let's just get this over with. Self-sabotage is rarely something that we consciously choose, but it's something that we frequently engage in. Usually it's starting in very subtle forms like withdrawing and pushing away the very people that are best poised to help us. I heard somewhere that an expression that an addict will jump out of a third-story window because we're afraid of falling out of the penthouse. And that makes sense to me. Self-destructing is what my brain was programmed to do. I've learned that creating and giving are the best ways to ensure that I don't destroy. I always have a couple of projects in mind, always have things that I'm working towards, Because when I don't give my brain something to focus on, sometimes it just goes to dark places. And that's a default setting for most of us, whether that's going back to places in our past or things in our lives today that are painful. If you don't give your brain something to focus on, it will choose something, and chances are what it chooses, left to its own devices, will not be healthy. So I've come a long way with this, but it was a vital piece of moving away from depression, because for years and years and years, there was this part of my brain that when I wasn't connected to good people, when I wasn't doing things that were healthy, there'd just be this thought like, well, you should probably just kill yourself. I think for most of us, the hard part is having the courage to choose what comes next and being confronted with whatever that is. Maybe you want to be a better partner. Maybe you want to be a parent. Maybe you want to advance your career. All of those things are awesome, but of course we need mentors. We need people who are willing to invest in us. And we need to be able to ask for that guidance, because left to our own devices, we're going to pretend that we know what we're doing, or we'll settle for less than we can have because we're so afraid of vulnerability. We're so afraid of relying on others. We tell ourselves this bullshit story about how important it is to be independent. And independent usually means I'm afraid to just lean on anybody. I'm afraid that they'll just let me down. Our experience is that people will betray us, they will turn on us, they will disappoint us, and the more afraid we are, the more we expect everybody to act more or less like our family of origin. Too often we settle for far less than we can have because we're afraid of taking risk. We're scared that we've gone maybe as far as we can, when the reality is we've gone as far as we can alone. It takes humility to remain teachable. We need introspection. Too many of us are stuck in analysis and overthinking. Introspection is really taking stock of yourself and your life. Asking yourself hard questions like, what's missing? What still hurts? What do I need to add? What do I need to let go of? To answer the questions, it's scary. It produces a certain amount of anxiety because it leads us to responsibility. When you don't know what you need or what you want, you don't actually have to do anything. If you know what that thing is, then you have the responsibility of working towards it. Unfortunately, we often are people who see it as acceptable to disappoint ourselves. We work very hard not to disappoint others, and unfortunately that means we usually work to keep our expectations low. We're afraid of loss, we're afraid of rejection, and we have this idea that disappointing people or letting them down means that they'll leave us. And so the cost of keeping our expectations low is that we don't necessarily seek out any opportunities. We don't look for what's going to make our lives better. We fight this losing battle of self-control. We fight to just simply maintain what it is that we have. And we tell ourselves this terrible lie that we just need to figure it out. And I cringe every single time I hear that, because figuring it out is something you do inside of your head and usually alone. Other times people tell me, well, I just need to keep doing what I'm doing, which is usually a bad idea. I mean, if what you're doing is working for you in every part of your life, then that's great. But also look for the things that you stop doing. Usually when somebody relapses and they're looking back, they can tell me all about the things that they stopped doing, the things that worked for them long before they ever relapsed. So again, start with Maslow's hierarchy. Focus on manageability and sustainability. I get it. Stability is not a sexy concept, but everything that it makes possible is. Routines and habits and self-discipline are not things I enjoy developing, but they allow me to maximize my time. Getting organized is the example I usually use. Nothing about me does that naturally. Nothing about me necessarily wants that. But being organized, having routines and habits throughout my day reduces stress, which improves my health, helps my immune system. I rarely get sick. It helps me to make the most of the time that I have in any given day. It helps me to not be confronted with the fear of forgetting, the fear of just sometimes it feels like you're juggling so much you're afraid of dropping balls or forgetting, falling short in some area of your life. So it's amazing to me. The things that have really caused me to melt down and flip shit are always the little things. So what next for you potentially is developing some habits, little things, making sure that your cell is charged, making sure that you know where your car keys are, writing down those appointments and not keeping everything just in your head. If it doesn't exist on paper, if it doesn't exist on a computer screen, then chances are, even if you don't forget, even if you don't drop those balls, there's going to be a certain amount of stress in trying to keep it all straight. So bringing those things out into the open, adding structure to your life, and making your life far more manageable is a great investment, particularly if you're looking to make some investments, make some changes in your life. For a lot of us, what's next could be a deeper level of healing. Trauma recovery work is something that most of us need and nearly all of us fear. We often just say that we're going to move forward and leave the past in the past. But of course, if what happened in your past is still limiting or having some negative effect on the person that you are today, then it's not really over. Potentially check in with your loved ones about what's next for you. The relationships and people that are closest to you, what do they need from you? Can we have some vulnerable conversations? Can we accept the responsibility of becoming better as partners, as parents? Can we learn to be a better friends? Can we not only make amends for our past, but invest more in better connections in the present? Developing those connections, particularly with people who have lived experience in recovery, is obviously just so vital. And to do that within a program is great, but to do that in treatment, to do that in any setting in your community is an important safeguard, but it's also an investment. The best investments we make are in people. And allowing people to invest in us means that we have that much more to offer others. We have that much more to pay forward. But I get it. It's scary, it's counterintuitive, it's not at all what we're used to, and it feels too often like an invitation for disappointment. It feels like relying on other people is just a way to get hurt. I'm going to check the streams real quick. Would love to hear from you. What's going on with you? What's happening in your recovery? Always welcome new connections and the opportunity to be of service. Okay, folks are quiet. That's totally cool. It's for a lot of us, I think the next step is setting some goals in our career, setting some goals financially. I think we look at these things in black and white terms, and the fear that I most often hear is I don't want to become materialistic, I don't want to be overly concerned with money, and that's totally great. But wanting financial security, wanting to provide more for your family, that's awesome. We just have to trust ourselves to balance our priorities and be very mindful about where we spend our time and energy. I've always said if you show me how someone spends their time and money, I can tell you what they value. We need a lot of accountability for our goals holistically, but particularly when we're taking on something new or trying to invest more in an area of our lives. The risk is that we end up practicing firehouse management. So firehouse management, because we're people who live at the extremes, we typically hyper-focus on one area of our life only to find that something else is kind of falling off. So you hyper-focus on your career, but then you notice that your home life is settling. So you hyper-focus on your home life and try to invest more time and be more present for the people you love. But then as you do that, you find that your recovery is suffering and you're not doing meetings or you're not doing all those things that are helpful for you. And this is all a great balancing act. The way that I came to think about it is that I have what I do for my family, what I do for my career, and what I do for myself. And unfortunately, putting myself last in that list of priorities was what I most often did. It's hard because being a good parent typically means that you're always putting your children first, and being a good partner often means that you're putting your partner first. And all of that is, there's no right or wrong to it, but if you notice that you're just perpetually putting yourself last, then what you have is something that isn't manageable and isn't sustainable. Doing the very basics of self-care are things that we shouldn't treat as optional. They're vital to the stability of our daily lives, they're vital to our health, and they're vital towards maintaining a positive attitude, being receptive to suggestions, being receptive and open to the people that are in our lives. And ideally, all of this culminates in some form of spiritual awareness, where maybe we're checking in with our higher power. Maybe we're looking to the people who know us best and just being open and honest about where we're at, what it is that we're thinking about, what it is that we're working towards, and not so much asking advice, because that's a way of hiding from vulnerability, but asking for a sounding board. I'm going to share with you, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm working towards, how does it sound? Do you see anything that I'm missing? Are there some blind spots here? Am I taking on too much? We, again, are people that tend to live at the extremes. So being open to people pointing out what your limitations are, pointing out maybe you're trying to balance too many things. All of these things are hard to hear. But in the absence of that, we're the only ones that are monitoring and evaluating ourselves. We're the only ones that are holding ourselves accountable, and that's a recipe for disaster. Again, balance just doesn't come naturally to us, and so rushing from one priority to another, trying to balance everything out, it's really an opportunity to examine what it is that we expect of ourselves, what are the standards that we're holding ourselves to, are those realistic, are they even possible? Sometimes I've worked with folks and asked them to just write down all of the responsibilities in their life currently, what they expect of themselves in each. And what we find upon close inspection is that there aren't enough hours in the day, or there just isn't enough to be able to pull off everything that we expect of ourselves. Rebecca, thank you for writing in. It's always good to hear from you. Abby, thank you for checking in. It's great to have you all with us today. The next barrier, I think, in terms of choosing what's the next step, what's the next goal, sometimes it feels like we're faced with an all or nothing decision, a once and for all decision, and that's rarely true. But when it comes to really big things like a career choice, or whether or not I go back to school, or whether or not I get job training, sometimes it feels like this once and for all decision, which puts an enormous amount of pressure on us. And just like so many other places in life, we're afraid to choose. And so maybe we procrastinate. That's pretty common for us. Maybe we avoid it. The way that I ask folks to think about it is, you are going to choose. The only thing that's up for grabs is, are you going to make that choice consciously, or is it going to be a subconscious choice? Choosing consciously, doing everything consciously, works a million times better. But sometimes we just decide to maintain status quo. Sometimes we settle. Sometimes we just try to avoid the things that are causing us to feel anxious or afraid. And deep down, an awful lot of us have this idea that if I ignore it long enough, it'll go away. And I joke with folks that I've only found two things that go away if you ignore them: teeth and good people. So I've also asked folks to notice whenever they're referencing it. So if I ignore it, it will go a long way. I don't get it. It's not worth it. Fuck it. Every time we use the word it, we're making a reference to self. And so the things that don't seem worth it or seem too complicated or too hard to understand, those are all aspects of ourselves. What we're really trying to do is come to understand ourselves, come to a place where we're developing an identity, come to a place where we're more and more comfortable with who we are, with what our lives are. And if you're new in recovery, hearing things like the promises from AA sound like things that are just impossible. They couldn't possibly happen. But the longer you go on this path, the more cool things that become attainable, achievable, things that we couldn't have even imagined earlier in life or early on in recovery become things that are eminently possible. So I want to encourage you to put all of these things on paper, or at least type them out on a computer screen. I promise you that if they only exist in your mind, first of all, they're very unlikely to come to fruition, and second of all, they're just going to keep going around in this circular pattern. Practice sharing your hopes, wants, dreams, and feelings with the people who support you. Practice asking for what you need and even some of what you want. We didn't get sober to be miserable. We deserve to have a life second to none. And what that looks like for each individual is different, but there are things that all of us want. There are things that all of us need and deserve. And I think that's especially important because your disease is going to tell you that you don't deserve this. Your disease is going to tell you that those things may be true for other people, but they're not true for you. Your disease wants you alone, disconnected, and miserable. Your disease wants you stagnant. It doesn't want you working towards goals, and certainly not dreams. I share with folks a quote from E. E. Cummings. He said that it takes great courage to grow up and become who you really are. Recovery, in a very real way, is growing up. All of us experienced some degree of arrested development. We all experienced things that prevented us from growing and learning. We experienced things that made us feel broken instead of feeling whole. We were not free to develop a strong sense of self, and what was instilled within most of us is things that need to be extracted. The idea of not being good enough or not being worthy or not being lovable. So my hope is that you'll make some investments in yourself, that you will have a network of people who support you. My hope is that you'll take stock and be open to suggestions, but also be open to challenges. Adam, thanks for writing in. Wouldn't it be fair to say, given your average day, that there's only so much you can get done? Is there, in the list of priorities, yes, it helps to make sure that you're on top of it because you're essentially the pilot flying this plane and you don't want to crash it on the side of a mountain. However, the balancing act should be something I feel you should share with your significant other if you have one, or if not, at least make a list of your priorities that you can physically see, but always put yourself on the very top of what the priorities of yourself are that you want to accomplish. Adam, I agree wholeheartedly. Putting yourself first, especially in the context of recovery, means that your recovery is your highest priority. Because if you don't have that, you're going to lose whatever else it is that you're working towards or trying to attain. Being honest and realistic with yourself about limitations and about how much time you have, that's tough for us. I usually joke with people in early recovery because people in early recovery are usually late for, everything. We don't account for things like the fact that there might be some red lights or stop signs between where we are and where we're going. We're not necessarily realistic about what we can achieve in any given length of time. We usually are pushing ourselves. We're the proverbial bull in a china shop. And what I've learned about my limitations is that when I don't accept them, I get to run headfirst into them. That wall that you keep hitting, those are your limitations. That's whether that's the amount of time in a day, whether that's the degree to which you're meeting your own basic needs and taking care of yourself, whether it's too many plates that you're trying to keep spinning, whatever it is, being realistic about that is great, but I think what it really takes is accountability. If I'm not bouncing off other people that I respect, here's what I'm doing, here's what my goals are, here's the resources I'm using, then sooner or later it's all going to crash and burn anyway. So I hope that you have people in your life who would challenge you, and what I mean by that is sometimes I'm less than honest with myself. Sometimes I am looking at things the way I want to see them instead of the way they are. I need people who are secure enough in themselves to call me out and tell me when I'm doing too much or taking on too much. And in the absence of that, again, it's just a losing battle for self-control, and I don't want any of that. So my hope is that a little bit at a time, you're developing some goals. You have some realistic plans about how to achieve those goals. You have people that are holding you accountable, but you also have people that are supporting you meaningfully and ideally are teaching you what they've learned. When we're afraid to rely on others, we end up reinventing the wheel and taking a lot of unnecessary strife along the way. So, as always, I would love for you to connect with me, Jim LaPierre on Facebook. Feel free to friend or follow me. Please connect with our site, sobernow.com. Totally stoked to share with you again. The program is completely free now. We've opened it up. There's just such an overwhelming need in the world, and we don't want financial costs to be an obstacle. So the program has two 28-day home study programs. The first is for folks who are looking to boost their recovery from substance use disorder, and the second program is for folks like me who identify as affected others, who have loved ones in active addiction or maybe early recovery. It's an incredibly stressful thing to live through, and so there's a lot of good stuff in there about how do you not only care for yourself, but your non-addicted family members as you go through this journey, hopefully together. Please take excellent care of yourself and each other. I look forward to joining you again soon.